International Law University, Delhi in 2014. After working as a legal writer with Mint and an associate fellow with Vidhi Centre for Legal Policy, she completed her LL.M from Panjab University, Chandigarh. Her LL.M dissertation was titled Animal Rights and Religion, a Legal Perspective. So welcome, Apoorva. It really gives me a lot of hope when I see people who are actually pursuing higher studies in animal law. So welcome, and we're honored to have you here.
Thank you so much, Shankar. Thank you.
So, we'll start with our discussion on sacrifice. So before we start, why don't you tell us exactly what animal sacrifice refers to when we are talking about it, as in what does it include?
Okay, so in the context that we will be talking today, animal sacrifice will be referred to as something which is made as an offering to God, which is an oblation, or to propitiate a deity, or to ward off some evil. Whenever an animal is sacrificed for this purpose, that is what we're referring to. So there are three kinds of major situations which we will be talking about. So there is Bali, the concept of Bali or Balidan in Hinduism. There is sacrifice on the occasion of Bakrid. So that's another one. And the third situation is with animal sacrifice in tribal societies and cultures. Now the third situation is what we will not be dealing with, because this is an issue that has not come up before the courts ever. However, the issue of animal sacrifice in Hinduism and Islam has come up before courts. So that is what we'll be talking about. There are two interconnected issues here. One is the issue of cow slaughter, and the other is the issue of religious ritual slaughter, which means whether an animal is killed as in a manner which is halal or not, or kosher. So that these are issues that might come up during the discussion, but they're not strictly the focus of animal sacrifices we'll be talking about today. Yeah.
So these haven't been brought before the court as of now. These issues.
Cow slaughter has been brought before the courts abundantly, but the religious ritual slaughter has not come up before Indian courts at all.
Nice. Fine. So when we are concerned about animal sacrifice, what has been the approach of Indian courts, as they have attempted to resolve this conflict between religious freedom, which is a fundamental right, and the welfare of animals?
So I think I'll divide my answer into two parts. One, I will deal with Islam and how the courts have dealt with that issue. And in the second part, I'll be dealing with Hinduism and how the courts have dealt with that part of it. Right? So when we come to Islam, I think it's very important to mention at the outset that there has been no clear case where the issue has come up before the Supreme Court, whether animal sacrifice is permissible or is an essential religious practice in Islam. So there has been no case like that. But there have been a catena of cases where the question that has come up before the Supreme Court is whether a cow can be slaughtered as an essential religious practice for animal sacrifice on Bakrid. So this is the Hanif Qureshi case. Now this is a really old case. It predates the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. But in this case, and I will quote because I don't want to misquote a Supreme Court judgment here, what they say is that it is therefore optional for a Muslim to sacrifice a goat for one person or a cow or a camel for 7 persons. So somewhere the court seems to impliedly suggest that animal sacrifice is an essential religious practice of Muslims. However, it's not essential to sacrifice a cow. So that is not, sacrificing a cow is not an essential religious practice, but other kind of animal sacrifice like goats, etc., that seems to be acceptable, even though nowhere in the judgment has it been clearly said that it is an essential religious practice. Now this judgment went on to be followed in a number of cases. So this Hanif Qureshi itself was a cow slaughter case. Then came the state of West Bengal versus Ashutosh Lahiri case. Now here again, the Supreme Court just followed what was said in Hanif Qureshi and again said that cow was not necessary to be slaughtered. But again, impliedly accepted that animal sacrifice is an essential practice. And then this was the more relatively recent case we have on this is the state of Gujarat versus Mirzapur Moti Qureshi Kasab Jamaat. Now, this is a constitutional bench judgment of the Supreme Court, and again they've cited Hanif Qureshi here. So, and then there are a couple of other cases. So, these are the cases where animal sacrifice has been dealt with as an essential religious practice, but not clearly stated as such. But then we have a couple of other cases from high courts. So there's this case of Siraj versus District Collector. Now these are cases that deal with camels, and there they haven't discussed the aspect of essential religious practice, but they've relied on other sorts of provisions like municipalities, rules, etc., which require animals to be slaughtered under in proper slaughterhouses, etc., in order to deny permission to slaughter the camels. So these are the cases we have in Islam as far as animal sacrifice is concerned. When we come to Hinduism, now this is very interesting because presently there is a case that is pending in the Supreme Court. Now this is because there was a judgment in June 2020 from the Kerala High Court, which upheld the constitutionality of a statute, which is the Kerala Animals and Bird Sacrifices Prohibition Act. And so people went in appeal against this decision to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has admitted the appeal. And they have argued that animal sacrifice is an essential religious practice of Hinduism. However, we have a number of judgments from different high courts. There is a Tripura High Court judgment of 2019. Now, there is a stay on this judgment by the Supreme Court, but the judgment, it doesn't mean that the judgment becomes meaningless, right? Now in this division bench judgment of the Tripura High Court, they have said that animal sacrifice is not an essential religious practice in Hinduism, and they banned it in the entire state of Tripura. There is a Ramesh Sharma judgment from the Himachal Pradesh High Court, which used the doctrine of parents' patry, and then went on to prohibit animal sacrifice in the state of Himachal Pradesh. In Uttarakhand, there is a very tricky situation where in the case of Gauri Mulekhi versus state of Uttarakhand, what they've done is they've said that animal sacrifice is only allowed if the animal is being killed for human consumption. So if it is being killed just to lie there and rot, that is not allowed. So they've interpreted the provisions of the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act in such a manner that limited animal sacrifice is allowed. So that is the situation in Uttarakhand. And as I mentioned, Kerala is the latest judgment we have, where they have said that animal sacrifice can be prohibited by the legislature. So these are largely the cases that have been dealt with animal sacrifice. I must mention that in 2000, so the Supreme Court has a relatively ambivalent position on animal sacrifice because firstly they have stayed the Tripura High Court judgment. So after they stayed the judgment, animal sacrifices were carried out in the state of Tripura. Then in 2015, there was a journalist called Varaki. He filed a writ petition in the Supreme Court saying that animal sacrifice across religions should be banned. And this was Justice H.L. Dattu's bench, and they dismissed the petition completely, saying that under our, keeping in account our traditions and culture, this was a very sensitive issue, and they could not entertain a petition like that. So I think the high courts have been relatively more clear in enunciating a stand on animal sacrifice as compared to the Supreme Court. And hopefully we will have a judgment from the Supreme Court soon on animal sacrifice when the Kerala High Court case is adjudicated. So then we will find out what the Supreme Court has to say. But that's largely the court's position on animal sacrifice.
So when the question actually came before the Supreme Court, it did not even entertain the PIL.
Yeah, it did not. Yeah, it did not. Yeah, it said it was too sensitive an issue.
Okay. It is indeed. I'll just tell one thing to our attendees here, all the audience. We'll take questions at the end of the webinar. So you can post it, you can send it on the chat, and we'll take it up at the end of the webinar. Okay. Moving forward. So, Apoorva, tell me, what are the factors that the court looks into when, these cases where religious conflict of animal sacrifice and animal rights issue come to them? What are the factors that court discuss.
Okay. So some of the most common issues that the court looks at is whether, since this is animal sacrifice is a religious issue, so the right to freedom of religion comes in. So Article 25 comes in, and there we have a catena of cases which go on to say that only essential religious practices are protected. Now, the essential religious practice test is itself being examined by a 9-judge bench of the Supreme Court, which is examining whether this should be the test to resolve religious conflicts. But as of now, this is the law of the land. And so, the most common thing that courts do when they get cases of animal sacrifice is that they try to establish whether this is an essential religious practice for that religion or not. And as I've mentioned in a number of cases with respect to Hinduism, they have found that it is not an essential religious practice to sacrifice animals. Another thing that the courts do is that they look at directive principles of state policies. So specific policies, specifically we have Article 48, Article 48A, and then they rely on fundamental duties quite often. And then there are a set of judgments which talk about having a harmonious balance between directive principles of state policy, fundamental duties, and fundamental rights. So, that you cannot say that DPSPs are less important than fundamental rights, starting from Minerva Mills and so on, right? So, the courts look at fundamental duties, and the ones that they've specifically started referring to is the compassion for living creatures bit. They refer to our fundamental duty to abjure violence, which they interpret as ahimsa, and then go on to say that this is a duty of every citizen. And then with respect to animal sacrifice cases specifically, they refer to scientific temper and humanism and a spirit of inquiry and reform being a fundamental duty of every citizen. Another thing that the courts rely on are slaughterhouse rules. Now, these rules come in very handy because they have very specific directions on how animals can be slaughtered. So, an animal that is being slaughtered has to be slaughtered in a slaughterhouse and not in a public place as such. So that is the first thing that comes in, just for hygiene, etc., and to save people that gruesome sight. And then another thing that the slaughterhouse rules talk about is that an animal that is being slaughtered should not be able to, other animals should not be able to see that animal, because this will otherwise provoke fear in them, and their death will be even more painful. So that is one thing. And I think finally that the courts often rely on is an interpretation of Section 28 of the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. Now, what is the Section 28 of the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act? Now, it is a saving as respect to manner of killing prescribed by religion. So, what this section says is that nothing contained in this act shall render it an offense to kill an animal in a manner required by the religion of any community. So, basically what it says is, so what the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act does is that it provides a list of offenses, things that would qualify as offenses. And what Section 28 does is carve out an exception. So it says that when an animal is slaughtered in a manner which is prescribed by a religion, then it is not going to be an offense. So now the problem arises that different high courts interpret it differently. And many people also interpret this very differently. So what do you mean by manner, right? So does it only mean how you kill the animal? So does it only mean whether you are slitting its jugular vein as it's done in the case of halal? Or are you killing it by the jhatka method? Is it that? Or does the manner also include animal sacrifice? Now, if you look at the Himachal judgment and the Kerala judgment, they seem to believe that it only talks about the way the animal is slaughtered. So basically, this is only a protection for religious ritual slaughter, which is why I mentioned in the beginning that we'll slightly touch upon this issue, right? That is the interpretation of these courts. However, if you look at the Uttarakhand High Court in Gauri Mulekhi, so there it seems that the court is interpreting Section 28 to mean that uh, it's sorry, I just lost my train of thought for a second. But it seems that the court is interpreting Section 28 to mean that any kind of animal sacrifice will be covered by it. So, animal sacrifice will be included within the purview of Section 28. And this is actually an argument that was made by the petitioners in the Kerala case. They argued before the court that it Section 28 allows them to sacrifice animals. But this was not accepted by the Kerala High Court, but this is an argument they'll be making again in the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court will be the final deciding authority on what is the real meaning of Section 28. So I think another thing that is important to remember at this point of time is that all of these animal sacrifice cases, even though we refer to them as one holistic bunch, they are all under very different circumstances. So if you look at the Tripura case, now in the Tripura case, the challenge was to the fact that the state itself was indulging in the practice of animal slaughter. So the district administration in certain districts was actually offering up a goat for slaughter to the temple. And that was the challenge in the Tripura High Court case. So it was whether the state can do this. Then when the Kerala High Court case happened, there the challenge was to a legislation which prohibited animal sacrifice in temples. And if you look at the Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand cases, they challenged the animal sacrifice practice completely. So these are different circumstances that these cases come in. So courts have different ways of looking at it, and they take into account different factors. But one of the things that stands out in almost all the cases is the test of essential religious practice. That is what is employed mostly by courts when they come to animal sacrifice cases.
So basically, what I understood was that when it comes to high courts, there is a little inconsistency in their views, right? Mm-hmm. So, you were just telling me about the Supreme Court judgment for where, they are thinking as to which animal for sacrifice is better, like, one cow or the goat. But it seems as if there's an implied this thing that the animal sacrifice is essential to the religion. So what does it mean for the animal rights movement when the apex court itself, there's an assumption, seems to imply that animal sacrifice is essential for the religion?
That's a very good question. So that is the problem with the essential religious practices test, right? There has been a lot of criticism of the essential religious practices test because by a lot of experts, because what they say is that judges are not religious experts. And a lot of texts that Indian judges rely on are interpretation of Indian texts by Western scholars who may not have understood the context of this. Like you will see this in Hanif Qureshi as well, the 1958 judgment which is followed in every cow slaughter case ever since. In Hanif Qureshi also they relied on the interpretation of the Quran by a Western scholar. To argue that slaughtering a cow for 7 people and slaughtering a goat for 1 person is acceptable or is an essential practice. So this is what happens when you apply the essential religious practices test, right? So now whether essential religious practices test has to be reconsidered is a question pending before the Supreme Court. So there is a possibility that this might change, but I think it is important to keep in mind that the moment a court says something like that animal sacrifice is an essential religious practice, it's game over for the animals. Then there is no scope for debate, because then the right to freedom of religion comes in. Because Article 25(1) will protect anything which is an essential part of religion as long as it does not offend public order, morality, health, or does not affect any other fundamental right under Part 3, right? So these are the exceptions that you have. So it is a very, very tricky question. Like if you look at the Tripura High Court judgment, you will see that the court says makes very blanket statements that there is no religion that asks for slaughter of animals. There is no religion that talks about killing of animals. And if you look at the same thing in the Uttarakhand High Court judgment in Gauri Mulikhi, there they say that it is wrong to say that no religion asks for animal sacrifice. Um, so it is very contradictory, because you see, like, one high court is interpreting a certain thing to be a religious instruction. The other high court is saying completely different about the same thing. So at the end of the day, we have, what it does is that it leads to absolute chaos in judgments. There is no consistency. Some high court, so if you look at the Kerala High Court judgment, they have followed the Tripura High Court judgment. But then there is a divergence. So all of this is very, very confusing for people who are studying animal law like me, and I think it's even more confusing for the practitioners because they don't know what to rely on. So essential religious practice as a test has created so much confusion, especially in animal law jurisprudence, that I think this test needs to go.
Yeah, it's very discouraging also for all these people, animal lovers, animal activists, when something like this becomes is said by the apex court itself, that it becomes is essential for a religion. You see, it's a very discouraging. Like there's an end to it.
But I think sorry, go on.
Sorry, no, continue.
No, I was just saying that we have to bear in mind that they haven't exactly said it in so many words that is, animal sacrifice is an essential religious practice in Islam, but they have said that to a large impliedly they have admitted that it is an essential religious practice.
And that same judgment, that implied thing, has been followed by various high courts. Yeah.
So I think we have to wait for an actual case to come up before the Supreme Court where someone challenges, the constitutionality, or just challenges the practice of animal sacrifice across religions again, because it has been dismissed once. So it really depends on the bench. But go on. You were saying something, sorry.
No, I was just thinking, how much would, for me, I lose my religion or something like this if I realize an animal sacrifice, something like that, is not essential for that religion. I was just thinking, how would it change my thought process or my beliefs on my religion? Is it that important for me? I was just thinking about that. So,
there are a number of Supreme Court judgments which, when they're deciding whether something is an essential religious practice or not, they see whether it will change the fundamental character of the religion. So, a lot of things are deemed to be non-essential practices because they don't cause any fundamental change in the character of the religion. But again, that is very subjective. Like, what is going to cause a fundamental change? Because in the animal sacrifice judgments, they have held very clearly that there's no fundamental change in the character of Hinduism if the practice is stopped. In fact, if you look at animal sacrifice judgments with respect to Hinduism, there's also a reference to human sacrifice. And what they've said is, in all of these temples, or at least in the Tripura temples, there used to be human sacrifice till about 500 years ago. So they have said that when that practice could be discontinued, why can't animal sacrifice as a practice be discontinued? So that is an argument, but again, depends on the courts completely.
So true. So I think this question has been there in my mind for a long time. How do we achieve this harmony, between animal sacrifice as a religious practice and animal rights movement? This is gaining momentum gradually. It has gained a lot of momentum, and considering other factors as well, like killing of animals, animal sacrifice, it is also a challenge globally for the global economy. Then when you look at environmental laws, climate change, it is having an impact. So how do courts achieve this harmony between these two?
Okay, so here comes a very tricky question. Now, I think this is again it's something which we have a subjective opinion on, and in my opinion, I think this is where constitutional morality comes in. Now, constitutional morality as a concept is relatively recent in Indian jurisprudence because it has been used in Natej Singh Johar case, which was the Section 377 judgment. So there they relied on constitutional morality. Then it was used in the Sabrimala case. Now there it created so much controversy, because everyone was like, "Oh, this is vague. What does it mean?" That it led to a review, and the review eventually ended up referring the question of what is constitutional morality to another, a larger bench. So what is it is still in dispute. But if you look at the Sabrimala judgment, the original judgment by Justice, where Justice Deepak Mishra was the chief, at that point of time, he interpreted Article 25 में the word morality is meaning constitutional morality and not societal morality. And this has been followed by courts. And then if you look at, I think the definition of constitutional morality that I would want to look at was given in this case called Government of NCT of Delhi versus Union of India. Now this was a center state dispute. What they defined constitutional morality as that has inherent elements in the constitutional norms and the conscience of the constitution. Oh, this sounds really vague. I understand that completely, but it gives you some scope for interpretation, right? Because it gives you some wiggle room. Because the moment you say essential religious practice, that animal sacrifice is an essential religious practice, then there is no possibility of a debate because people have the fundamental right to religion. So how do we bring animals into the picture, right? We bring in animals into the picture by talking about constitutional morality, by saying that there are provisions in our constitution which are kind of the conscience of our constitution, and which actually ask for animals to be protected. So this would be our DPSPs 48, 48A. This would be our fundamental duties, which I've mentioned before in this talk. So these could form the basis for constitutional morality. And I'm not just talking in the air, because the Tripura High Court, in its judgment on animal sacrifice, actually relied on constitutional morality to say that, so it did rely on essential religious practices as well. But it also went on to talk about constitutional morality and said that keeping in mind our constitutional ethos, animal sacrifice should not be a permissible practice and it should be prohibited. So, even though it is a vague test, I think if you look at whether judges are better, qualified to decide on religious issues or whether they are better equipped to decide on constitutional issues, I think the balance would be in favor of constitutional issues. I think the judges are more qualified to decide what is constitutional morality as compared to what is an essential religious practice, because they're not theologians. They are judges. They are trained in the law. So they can still interpret what is going to be the scope of constitutional morality. But I don't think they can interpret what is essential or not essential for a religion without it leading to a lot of controversy, which it has. So I think this could be our way out. I think from the essential religious practice test, we have to move towards constitutional morality. That is the only saving grace for animals. Because otherwise, there isn't any scope for animal rights. Because even though we have the A. Nagaraja judgment, which gives rights to animals, it is still at the end of the day a judgment. And a judgment which is not quite well founded. So it just needs a larger bench of the Supreme Court to set it aside, and then animals are back to not having rights. So in that case, I think constitutional morality is still something we can rely on as far as animal rights are concerned.
Also, don't you think essential to a religion, this would differ from case to case, right? But constitutional morality, that is something just like any other judge found law or whatever, any doctrine which is well founded and which has been ruled by the court, it would stand in all cases,
I
and
think
from that perspective it can be looked into. However, when it comes to essentiality, essential to a religion, that would be very, it would differ from case to case.
not just case to case, I think it would differ from judge to judge and the sources that are placed before the court. Because as we've discussed, there are cases that say animal sacrifice is an essential practice, and there are cases which say that it is not an essential practice. There are cases which say animal sacrifice is permissible under certain circumstances, and then there are cases that say animal sacrifice is not permissible under circumstances, under certain circumstances. So I think it still gives us some wiggle room, and constitutional morality, I think, would be something like the basic structure. Like the courts keep on interpreting what the basic structure is, but it still gives some. There is some, there is a basic basis to it. What is the basic structure doctrine, right? So I think it is more akin to basic structure, but essential religious practice is just so bizarre and so random. It is, if you read through the judgments, it doesn't make any sense how something can be an essential practice in one case and not an essential practice in the other. So, and as I said, judges are not qualified to decide on questions of religion and theology. That I think should be left to the theologians, and judges should focus on, what is constitutional morality. Yeah.
And this is my next question. So you said there's so much inconsistency from different high courts and their views, then the Supreme Court. How much do you think the importance of the benches to whom, a case like that is given? What is the importance of the bench? Like you would know when it comes to Narayan Dutt or Karnail Singh or even the Himachal Pradesh judgment. It was Justice Sharma who gave all
wrote all the three judgments.
Yeah, he's like the animal judge with who's an animal champion, completely animal rights movement. But what about other judges, and like how much does that judge factor matter? Because it differs.
Yeah, absolutely. See, at the end of the day, the bench matters in all cases, right? But it becomes very significant, I think, because we have such limited jurisprudence in animal law in India that the judge becomes very important. If you look at, like, as you mentioned, that Justice Rajiv Sharma wrote in 2014, he wrote the Ramesh Sharma judgment of the Himachal Pradesh High Court banning animal sacrifice. Then he went to the Uttarakhand High Court, where he wrote the Narayan Dutt judgment, where animals were declared as legal persons. And then he went to the Panjab and Haryana High Court, where he wrote the Karnail Singh judgment, which is very similar to the Narayan Dutt judgment, by the way, where again animals were declared as legal persons within that state. Within the state of Haryana. Now, so can you see the difference just one judge is making to the jurisprudence? But it also, and again, if you look at, just if you want to see the impact that a judge can have, you look at the A. Nagaraja judgment of the Supreme Court, right? So this was a judgment that was authored by Justice K.S. Radhakrishnan, and he retired 1 week after he wrote the judgment. And if you remember, and if the audience clearly remembers, there was a lot of blabla. Everyone was going crazy, and there were protests all across Tamil Nadu against this judgment. And then an ordinance was passed by the state of Tamil Nadu, keeping the center in, in the know-how. And then, Jallikattu was permitted in the state of Tamil Nadu. Like, sometimes it really makes me wonder that what if Justice Radhakrishnan was still there? Would he have allowed his judgment to actually turn into nothing? Like, even though A. Nagaraja has a lot of problems because it's not based on actual, it doesn't, there is no basis for saying that animals have rights under the Indian Constitution. I mean, even though that would be an animal lover's paradise, right, where animals can have legal rights. But as of now, apart from that judgment, there is no basis for animals to have legal rights. So sometimes I wonder, one of the most progressive judgments of the Indian Supreme Court in the field of animal law was left unimplemented. Not just unimplemented, there was blatant contempt of this judgment, and the Supreme Court did nothing. So can you see how much difference did the bench make in this case? Because the judge who cared about the issue and who actually wrote the judgment on the issue had retired, and no one did anything about it. And Jallikattu has been happening every year since. So I think the bench really makes a difference. And sometimes what happens is that the judgments are very well intentioned. I am not saying that Justice Rajiv Sharma's judgments are not, there's something wrong with them. But what happens when we pass these judgments which don't have a legislative backing, or which don't have a foundational basis in a document like the Constitution, etc., is that they lead to very problematic outcomes, because either they are not followed. Like, we've declared animals as legal persons in the state of Uttarakhand, but how is it going to be enforced? And they don't declare, certain species of animals. All animals are legal persons. So if animals are legal persons, why are they being killed for meat? Why are they being killed for so many other purposes? Why are they being tortured, etc.? Right? So it leads to these very well-intentioned judgments lead to very problematic outcomes. And what happens as a result is that judicial authority gets eroded in the process, because at the end of the day, the judgment of the court is not being followed, right? So I think, and this is again my personal opinion, that the real change can only come from the legislature, because the legislature is the organ of the government that actually represents the will of the people in a democracy, and not the judiciary. As much as I love the next judgment on animal rights, and the Supreme Court is presently considering a case to decide whether animals can be declared as legal entities or not, but what happens when the judiciary takes these decisions is that it leads to very fickle decisions, because as of now, our legislative framework is not such that we can allow for animal rights. Animal welfare, yes, definitely. But to give rights to animals, our legislative framework is not designed in that manner. So when courts come out and they, make these declarations, it just leads to a lot of confusion, and it leads to a lot of inconsistency and uncertainty, because any time a larger bench can come and overrule that judgment, and that will lead to a lot of problems. So I genuinely believe that this is the legislature's, the ball should be in the legislature's court and not with the judiciary. Even though that's going to be a painstakingly slow process, and because animals are not really a priority for our elected representatives, and it will require an entire social movement. But I still think that the changes through the legislature are relatively more sustainable as compared to the changes that come through the judiciary, especially on animal law issues. Yeah, so that's largely it.
Yeah, we've seen, like you said, even A. Nagaraja, the Jallikattu judgment, that wasn't implemented. So
absolutely not.
Yeah,
it was flouted in its entirety.
Yeah, so what is happening is, even if the courts are giving a judgment, for example, the judgment of legal citizens in state of Haryana, it is definitely not being followed. There's been illegal transportation of animals, then killing every day. Somehow the other cases come up. So that's definitely not being followed. So the legislator really needs to strengthen the PCA. As far as I know, in it's been what? 80 years, 60 years of PCA, it hasn't been amended once.
Uh-huh.
Even the amendment that came was very small. It was with respect to the name of AWBI.
Mm-hmm.
So that, and recently, it started finally thinking of making the penal laws more stringent,
Mm-hmm.
changing the penal laws. Right now, the punishment, the amount is 10 rupees to 50 rupees. That's the range, 10 rupees to 50
Yeah.
to 100, yeah, for second offenders.
Yeah.
So yes, the PCA needs to really change.
Oh,
Or
definitely. Definitely. I think Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act has created, has made it so much easier to get away with animal abuse and animal cruelty. And as I said, like we've discussed Section 28 in today's session, and just the amount of confusion it's created. Uh, and because it's not worded very clearly, right? So there is a very strong case to be made for the amendment of the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act. And as I said, like the changes have to come from the legislature. They have, and because that is the only way they're going to be sustainable. Otherwise, it will just be. It would make very good news items. It would make very interesting headlines. It would make life interesting for animal law researchers like me. But it doesn't really help the animals at all.
and more than legislations coming, I think it's implementation. Even the PCA that we have currently, if implemented, at least 50% of what we have would bring a big change. But the
Absolutely.
implementation is so bad. I feel very sorry when I see this, but the entire situation is very sad.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. If you look at the prevention of the PCOS CAA, it's horrendous. It's absolutely horrendous, the implementation of this act. And it's just, I think there's very little awareness about the act. Like people think that it's okay to be cruel and they can get away with it because they don't. A lot of people may think it's morally wrong, but they don't realize it is also legally wrong to do this to an animal. Like often, if you confront an animal abuser, they will respond with ignorance about the existence of a law like this, right? So there is need to spread awareness about the act. But more than that, I think it's about time that the act was revised. There is some movement that I hear about, that there are discussions, but very little has been done so far. And I really hope something happens. Like I really hope it's uh, changed or amended very soon. But I don't have very high hopes at the moment.
No. Okay, that was wonderful. If anyone has any questions, you can
Thank you.
just put it on the chat. We have a few. I'll just see if we want to take those up. Anyone in the audience has any questions, please write it in the chat.
Okay, let me see.
Yeah, Apoorva, you can, if you want to take any, like, I'm just seeing the questions.
Yeah, yeah, I'm just reading through the questions.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Okay. I'm not sure if I would want to take those questions.
Yeah, just cow is not the only animal. Okay. Hmm.
So, yeah. I think I got a question which
Yeah.
is asking me, this what in my opinion should be the standards
Standards for
for
essential
essential
religious
religious practice.
practice. Yeah.
Actually, my opinion on this issue doesn't matter because the Supreme Court has, in so many cases, defined what should be the standard for essential religious practice. Um, I genuinely, they've said, as I said, that whether it leads to a fundamental change in the character of the religion, whether the non-observance of that practice would lead to a change in the fundamental character of the religion. I don't think my opinion on this should matter. I genuinely just think that essential religious practices is a bad test.
Hmm. Okay. There's another question. Can
Uh-huh.
animal sacrifice fall under the protections given by Article 19? Can it be regarded as a form of free speech and expression?
Animal sacrifice. I It hasn't ever come up before any court in any case, right? But it's not really freedom of speech uh, and expression. And especially when you have a fundamental right that deals with animal sacrifice specifically, I don't think it makes much of a difference. Uh, uh, that's my understanding of it. I don't think Article 19 के अंदर animal sacrifice can be covered. Especially when you have this Article 25, you have Article 26. They offer enough protection to a lot of practices, but it's just so far been held in a lot of cases that animal sacrifice is not protected as an essential practice under these articles. But you don't know. The Supreme Court actually might hold because if you heard of it, when the Kerala case came before the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court's the Chief Justice Justice Bobde at that time, while admitting the case, said that when it is not wrong to kill an animal and eat it, why is it wrong to kill it in a temple and eat it? So. If that is, I mean, that's just something he said in court, but if that's actually something that starts being followed, then like if it starts to percolate in the judgment, then I think we're in for difficult times as far as animal rights are concerned.
Okay, just check.
Yeah, any other questions?
Yeah, I'll just check. Just one second. I'll just check it.
Shrinkala,
Yes. Yes, sir.
if you, sorry, Apoorva,
Yes.
if you want, I can answer Abhishek's question. I can see they are very contentious in nature, but I can give my thoughts to him.
Sure.
I understand that he
So
has asked a lot of questions.
yes, sir. One thing, like he's asked on what can be done to, laws are there but not being implemented. So what can be done to, implement or stop this?
So
Apoorva.
is it related to only one animal or all animals he's talking about?
Let us include all animals and let's talk about
Okay.
how it can stop, how the PCA can be implemented in a much better way that it's effective.
Okay. So these are my thoughts, Abhishek, completely. I have been into animal welfare for almost a decade now. All animals are same for me. They breathe, they eat, uh, and they are used by humans for their own needs for hundreds and hundreds of years. Uh, I, I do not see cow as a special animal. Uh, in that case, buffalo should also be a special animal because they're pretty similar to each other. So all animals for me are the same. So saving a pig or a donkey or a horse or a camel is similar to saving a cow or a buffalo or a goat or a sheep for me. Okay. Now, implementation is a huge issue. There is no question about it. Uh, you have written somewhere that in UP and Haryana, Gorakshaks and all those things. See, I have been a part of teams who have gone and raided illegal abattoirs. These are not easy things to be done. Okay, and let's not go by religion because some of the largest meat trading companies in the country are actually owned by Hindus. So I will never go by religion. This is not done by a single religion. Apoorva will agree with me that
Absolutely.
even 20 years back, 30 years back, we used to give animal sacrifices when Durga Puja used to happen, right?
Yeah.
And probably it still happens in West Bengal, because West Bengal doesn't have the Cow Slaughter Act, and West Bengal is not really very kind to animals. Okay, now let's not have that Hindu Muslim thing at all. All animals are extremely important for the environment. They have specific roles cut out for them, and they are doing it to the best of their capability. You know, as far as implementation is concerned, anybody, if you're a lawyer, if you're studying law, you know the act is so frugal, act is so naive that nobody really cares. If you go to the police station and say, "Hey, this is happening," nobody cares. I mean, half of the people doesn't even know the Cow Slaughter Act, what is the maximum and the minimum punishment, and one state has copied one act, and the other state has copied the same act and given it to them. So this is different. I know the number of cows which moves from Rajasthan to Haryana and walk through Haryana, and they go towards Bengal. Okay, that's a different story we're going to take up in the next one. We talk about animal trafficking and how beautifully they move these cows. They take out 30,000 cows, 20,000 cows, and how finally 15,000 cows land up in the Bangladesh border. I'll tell you those stories, right? So it's not Hindu, it's not Muslim. Uh, every animal is important. The law, the act has to be more powerful. And as Apoorva rightly said, that we must have, I mean, this is a relentless fight to the highest courts of this country to say that the act has to be strong. People who are responsible, agencies which are responsible, AWBI, State Animal Welfare Board, SPCS, needs to be empowered, needs to be made a prosecution body like an NGT. They must have powers to prosecute. Then only you will see prosecution happening. Then only you will see, execution happening. Without that, no. It's a very tough thing to do. It's not easy at all. So as dear as cow is to you, the same way camel is very dear to me. I've saved thousands of them, and so every animal, for me, every animal is the same. They breathe, they eat, they have similar. They're very similar to each other, right? And they all do their work so well. Why are we forgetting pigs? Pigs clear all the trash that is lying in your colony in one shot, and then they go away, right? So everybody is important. So let's not get into this entire thing of Hindu, Muslim. We are all deep into this entire thing of cruelly treating animal for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Why are you forgetting that in villages today, when a male calf is born, we abandon the calf the next day? This is done by a Hindu, not by a Muslim, right? So we are all cruel. We are the cruelest creature possible on earth, humans. And we have completely eradicated the environment in the last so many years. Hundreds and hundreds of years. Now we are coming to a point where if we don't stand up and do something, 40 years hence, I don't see any environment there. So that's how I would like to answer this. Maybe I've not been able to satisfy you, but that is how I believe we should look at animals. Thank you.
Thanks, Saptarshi. Thank you for answering that.
Yeah. So there's an important question that is being raised, that there's so many, statements and notifications. However, implementation is a problem. And yes, that is the problem with, I think, all laws.
All laws.
Yeah, implementation is a problem. And when it comes to animal rights, yeah, it's not being implemented.
It's not the last priority, right? Animals are the last priority. Like people, I think any person who is interested in animals or their welfare is always confronted with the question, why animals? Why not humans? Right? I think it's very understandable why animal laws are very poorly enforced, because at the end of the day we have to realize, right, that it helps human beings to not treat animals well, right? If you don't have good rules to regulate how animals have to be slaughtered, you can slaughter them in a more economical manner. See, as long as they are going to be treated as property, which they are under our laws, uh, they will be treated as such, right? They will, people will look at them as something that can be, used to benefit from. And as long as that happens, there's not much we can do. So I think somewhere there has to be a consciousness, and I think one of the best thing that I liked in all of these judgments that I read that banned animal sacrifice, they all talk about creating awareness among people. Animal law was not even taught till a few years ago to law students. So it wasn't part of the Bar Council's curriculum. But for law schools, but now it is prescribed. And but what I think it's barely taught, not even to law students. I can guarantee that most law students don't know the bare provisions of the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, because it's not considered important. And as long as we don't consider animal law important, I don't think any change is going to happen, and or any implementation is actually going to improve.
Apoorva, even I think definitely it comes to the statutory bodies when it comes to implementation. However, it also relies on the public. Like, there is a law, and even beyond that, like, you're not supposed to treat anyone unequally. Even then, we see instances like, people throwing animals down the bridge for fun. So implementation also relies on the public. When you're seeing something like this happen, take it to the police. We can all ask why it is not being implemented. I think that question should be asked to ourselves. Everyone should ask themselves
Absolutely.
why it is not being implemented.
Absolutely.
It's
How many of
totally
us
upon the
have seen
legislature.
some animal abuse and not bothered to report it, right?
Yeah.
I think we've all been guilty of that. So as long as that culture doesn't change, as long as we don't, as long as we start, till we start thinking that animals deserve protection and it is our duty to protect them, there isn't much hope, honestly. But I don't want to leave with such a negative opinion. But I think there is growing awareness. There is definitely a change.
Definitely, and we've had so many petitions before the Supreme Court now with respect to legal citizenship, legal entity for animals. Then we have amendment for the penal provisions in the PCA. Like, the notice has already been given to the center, and the ministry is coming up, is asking for suggestions. So we are seeing a lot of
Progress. Yes.
progress right now. So it is a
Definitely.
good note. Yeah, it is on a
Definitely.
good
And
note.
in fact, the Supreme Court has recently admitted a petition that talks about the cruelty that is inflicted on cows and other cattle while they are artificially inseminated, etc. So there are a lot of these cases as well. So there is progress being made. So let's leave it at that, I think.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So you want to add something?
Yeah, I think I need to speak a little bit about Jallikattu.
So
Because Jallikattu was mentioned by Apoorva, and I think it was, as Apoorva rightly said, it was a path-breaking judgment as far as animal rights are concerned, animal welfare is concerned in this country. Dr. Radhakrishnan gave a judgment which was like, I mean, when we read the judgment, I think we were literally crying that this can be a judgment. Now, unfortunately, at that point of time, Tamil Nadu was going into elections. Jayalalitha was there, and BJP had forged a partnership with Jayalalitha, and it could have been a huge election issue. Jayalalitha understood that it's a very big election issue if Jallikattu does not happen in Tamil Nadu. So they did the ordinance. Dr. Radhakrishnan retired. Everybody else sat very helpless, went very quiet. And if you really look at the review petition, you will find out that how many people actually went into the review petition and how many people were original parties to the original petition. And you will see the politics playing out. It was all a case of politics, very unfortunate, but a very good judgment. I mean, if you really read the judgment in toto, That's
Yeah.
probably one of the most path-breaking judgment I've seen as far
It
as
is the
animal rights
most
are concerned.
progressive judgment so
Yeah,
far.
I have
That
not
is
seen
that is
such
for sure.
judgments. Even Rajiv Sharma's judgment, it is not that progressive. The Haryana judgment, the Uttarakhand judgment is not that progressive. That was one judgment which stood out. Absolutely. So, unfortunately, politics takes precedence at times, and you have to submit to it. But I'm sure with all these things happening, I mean, I'm very, very optimistic. Something is going to happen in the next 5 years. Definitely going to happen in the next 5 years. Because we will
I hope
have to
so.
build a movement to go to the highest court, to the high courts to say that this cannot, I mean, we cannot take this line down. I was discussing with you yesterday, I was saying that, 70 years of independence, a country which is moving into a $5 trillion economy, right?
Mm.
Consistently, we have seen 7.5% of growth rate. Everything good. Why are my animals so helpless on the road? Why can't we do something for them? I mean, it's a very basic thought. If your kid tomorrow morning stands up and asks you like this, we have no answer to give. And it's a shame. So I'm sure something will happen. I mean, everybody is, I mean, I see everywhere, and I'm so happy that with LawSikho and all, I'm so well connected now to people like you. And I can actually, I'm being educated so much by people like you right now because I had no idea about all these things. The other webinar we did with HSI and Dr. Mahapato. So I'm sure something good will happen. I'm very, very sure about that.
I hope so. I hope so.
Okay. Yeah.
Twinkle,
Thank you, sir.
please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Apoorva, so much for this session. Like, this
Thank
was
you, Shreya.
really nice,
Thank you
really
for letting me
informative.
do this.
Thank you so much for, coming for this session. Okay, then,
Thank
give
you.
no more questions.